Hello and welcome to the roundtable on two sessions. I'm Yang Xinmeng. Just in a few days, the top two political bodies in China, the two sessions will meet. And ecological conservation has grabbed increasing attention in recent years in both sessions. So today I invited two experts in this area to talk about the coexistence between human and wildlife. And they are Ahimsa Campos-Arceiz, who is a professor and principal investigator of Megafauna Ecology and Conservation Group at Xishuangbanna Tropical Botanical Garden. And also Li Yuhan, the team leader of Yangtze Delta Region Office at Shan Shui Conservation Center. Thank you both for joining. Welcome. Well, to those of you who are watching, if you have any questions, any topics that you're interested in, please leave your comments in below, so we'll talk about those questions that interest you the most. Well, first, Ahimsa, you are currently in Xishuangbanna in northwest China's Yunnan province, right? And you've been there for almost 3 years. So please tell us something. Xishuangbanna is one of, if not the most biodiverse place in China. So what does it feel like living and working in such an area?
Well, I think it's one of the best places to do what I do. I'm a tropical ecologist studying big animals, particularly elephants. And I live and work at the Tropical Botanical Garden, one of the most beautiful gardens in Asia, maybe in the world. And my office is in a green environment, extremely enjoyable.
Ooh.
And at the same time, we have cutting-edge scientific resources and capacity, wonderful experts here. So I'm a privilege. I live and I work in a very pleasant and productive environment. So then it's a very good experience.
That's a beautiful view. I really want to visit someday.
Please come.
And Yuhan, you've conducted many conservation projects with Shan Shui, and I know you've been to places across China in the wild, and you are currently based in Shanghai and Beijing, focusing more on urban conservation, right? And I know you just came back from Inner Mongolia, so tell us about it. What's in Inner Mongolia?
Yeah, I would like to have a window show like Ahimsa, but unfortunately, I'm currently based in Beijing. But last week, I was in Inner Mongolia, the western part of Inner Mongolia, for biodiversity survey. That area belongs to desert ecosystem or semi-desert ecosystem. So normally, people will think that in that type of area, there are not many wild animals. But in fact, when I was walking on the sand, I noticed many animal traces, such as their footprints or faces. So volunteers, me and my colleagues, figure out several places that we think that animals would like them, and we set up a couple of camera traps in order to capture their images. So we're returning to Inner Mongolia next month, and hopefully we will be able to discover what are the animals living in that area.
Well, I will remember that. I will come back to you to ask what you have caught in those cameras, because that's really impressive. Because I've been to a desert in Ningxia, Hui Autonomous Region, which is also in northwest China, and I went to the desert. I thought there would be nothing, just sand and dunes, scorching, barren land, but actually no. Like you said, I noticed there are, tiny little footprints on the sand. So actually it's full of life. That's really amazing. Life always finds a way. So yeah, let's go back to the theme, the two sessions. Yuhan, I know you must be familiar with this term, two sessions. It occurs every year, but Ahimsa, what do you know about it?
Well, I don't know much about this. I know the basics. I know that this is probably the most important political meeting of the year in China. And I understand that there are these two meetings by the advisory committee and the legislature committee, but it's not something that I follow very closely, or I don't know very well, what kind of motions or proposals have been proposed either this year nor in the past. So I have a basic understanding of how it works, and I understand that it's very important and it plays an important role in the planning and legislative process.
Yeah, so what kind of proposals that you would like to see more being brought up during the sessions? Is there any?
Well, in my case, I will go to my area of work. So then I work on the conservation, the ecology and conservation of very big animals like elephants or tigers or rhinos. And with the interactions with people. So I will be very interested in thinking about how we can create conditions for long-term conservation of these species, and at the same time thinking about how to reduce the conflict, particularly reducing the negative impacts on people. Because when people live next to elephants or next to tigers, in some cases, in many cases, local communities bear a high cost in the form of crop raiding or livestock depredation. So I'm very keen on seeing more legislation and more planning to mitigate these things, and thinking about long term, thinking not only about today's problems, but thinking about what kind of future we want by 2050, by the end of the century. So thinking that it's a very dynamic system and way to think about how it's going to change over time.
Yeah, so a bigger image. Well, Yuhan, what about you? What do you see in the two sessions? What motions or proposals are you interested in?
Actually, I was thinking about the meeting last year. During the two sessions last year, one of the wildlife conservation project that I have participated in, the Valley of the Cats, the snow leopard ecotourism project, was actually mentioned and recommended during the discussion, which was very surprising. But the delegates mentioned this project because it is a great example of wildlife conservation and community development. It shows that these two components can actually come together. So when I heard about this on the news, I was very, very happy.
Yeah, I remember that because that is when I knew about a project, the Big Cat Valley in Qinghai in Sanjiangyuan area. Yeah, so like we said, ecological civilization has become a much more popular topic in the two sessions now. You know, comparing with the year of 2016, just 5 years ago, when there were only less than 10 motions and proposals related to nature. Last year, we had more than 70, so a significant increase in only 5 years. And over the years, it has extended from, just pollution control to green development to biodiversity conservation and climate change. And also in October last year, we brought up Chinese modernization. And among the explanations, it specifically mentioned, it's the modernization of harmony between humanity and nature. So we can see that people are paying more and more attention to our relationship with nature. So I'd like to ask your opinions on this. What do you think of the modernization of harmony between humanity and nature, Ahimsa?
Well, I read about it, and I was very pleased to see that it came out in the meeting in October. And I looked a bit like an upgrade of the sustainable development concept. So the idea is that there was a time in which development was being seen as a very, very simplistic, linear kind of focus objective, thinking about economic development, thinking about a very, very human-centric parameters. But in the last 30, 40 years, there's a clear understanding that we depend on ecosystems, and then development should come in a way that doesn't post doesn't have a high harm, or doesn't have an unsustainable damage on ecosystems. And I think that's what the modern harmony talking about, right? So they're modernizing in a way that it's a green development, and is thinking about how to integrate this kind of economic development with ecosystem conservation.
Yeah, we need to find the balance between these two different parts. And Yuhan, what's your understanding?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this harmonious coexistence between nature and humanity, the first thought I have is, this is the reality. But the thing is, this reality has been ignored for many years and by many people. That's why we can see there have been on the world. And now we have this new target of modernization of this harmonious coexistence between nature and human. I think it sets a really high target, and it's a really good one, because human development cannot continue without a stable and healthy ecosystem. But at the same time, I can also imagine that this path is not going to be very easy. There will be conflicts and there will be challenges of how to bring together human society and nature conservation, bring together this economic development and wildlife conservation.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned conflicts here because, if we talk about human wildlife coexistence, it's not all about harmony. There's no way to avoid conflicts, especially when we make conservation success with a growing population of wildlife. So our challenge now is how to manage that conflict. And I think, Xishuangbanna would be a perfect example here. There are so many wildlife, there are conflicts, the famous wild wandering elephants created quite a lot of troubles there. But it seems that local people are still living happily with the wildlife together. So please, Ahimsa, tell us more about the situation there. How what are the conflicts and how do you reduce the problems?
Yeah, it's a complex topic. So let me just expand a little bit. I want to follow up on what Johan was saying. It's a matter of compromising. So then we cannot have the cake and eat it. So then whenever we do development, when we have 8 billion people with high technological development, with high consumption, we all do, I do, and I guess all of us do it. So then there's a cost. And then the point is to be sensible about, what kind of damage is, let's say, acceptable or what is too much and what are our priorities. Then when we talk about this kind of harmonious development, sustainable development, it's not black or white. It's staying in a gray area that is within there that we feel comfortable. And the same happens with what we call human-wildlife conflicts. And I'm going to talk now about the elephants here in Xishuangbanna because, as you know, elephants are loved animals by people in Xishuangbanna. It's an iconic image. If you come to Jinhong, you will see hundreds of thousands of elephant images everywhere. People love elephants. It's part of the culture and people feel kind of very warm and they really genuinely like elephants. But at the same time, elephants can be very problematic because they eat our crops and they are big animals. They can be dangerous. So then they cause a lot of damage to local people. And what we are seeing now in Xishuangbanna is a very interesting thing. And is that for the last 25 years or so, the population has been growing. Okay, so then before, if we go back in time 30 years, our main problem was how to stop the decline of the population. And that was achieved. And since 25 years ago, it has been growing and the population has doubled in this time. So that's a conservation success. That's a very good point. And when the population grows, you need to go somewhere else. So the elephants have been expanding away from their previous area. They were living in nature reserves, but now they have moved outside of nature reserves. And they have been moving
Can you give us some numbers, stats here? How did it grow?
Well, right now the estimate is around 350 elephants, which again is double from a bottleneck population of less than 200. And then what has happened is elephants used to be very scared of people because 30, 40 years ago, if an elephant came into someone's backyard or someone's orchard, people might be chasing them and they might be even shooting them. But in the last 40 years, we have seen a big change in values in society, at political level and also at citizen level. People now want conservation, and now it's strictly, very legal and very serious thing to harm an animal like an elephant. So then people don't react in the same way. And what has happened is that these elephants have expanded in space. Now we have elephants in many more places, including places that people forgot how to live with elephants, because in some places there's a tradition, but these elephants coming into new areas where people don't remember very well how to live with them. And these elephants are becoming very confident because now they can go wherever they want. No one is chasing them. No one is shooting at them. So they feel braver. And as a consequence, what they have is a very intense conflict between people and elephants. So our job is to find how we can do to continue growing the elephant population because the population is still small. We want it to be bigger, to be long-term viable without transferring the cost of conservation to local communities. Because people like us, many of our viewers, we live in cities, they're very happy to have elephants or tigers because there is no cost. There is no cost for us. It's cute and it's beautiful and it feels good. But it's people who live next to them who bear the cost. So then our job as conservationists and as in the case of the NPC and the CPP is to legislate in a way that we can create coexistence, so then elephants can live there, they can continue growing and expanding to new areas, but without placing a big burden to these local communities. And it's difficult, and there is no solution. There is no final point in which you say the conflict is solved. We have to manage forever some balance between what we call a tolerable conflict, where it's not too bad for people, it is okay for wildlife, and that balance is where we're trying to find.
Do we have any, technological ways, measures to help?
Yeah, in China, most of the human-elephant conflict mitigation is being done through a combination of monitoring elephants, and that is highly dependent on technology. So 15 years ago would not be possible. It's being done with drones, with camera traps, with real-life images that provide information about where elephants are, who is going where. And at the same time, with early warning systems that can transfer this information of where the elephant is to the local communities, so then they know how to be prepared. And there are different channels from WeChat to play the audio alerts on the ground, plus economic compensation. So then the other mechanism is trying to compensate financially the economic losses produced by elephants. So I have talked to farmers that they say, well, I plant my corn for the elephants. I know they will come. So, if as long as I'm being compensated, I'm okay. If people are not compensated, then of course the economic burden becomes unbearable, and in many cases could be unbearable. So these are the two main ways in which human-elephant conflict mitigation is happening right now.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because last year during the 2 sessions, I interviewed a CPPCC member who also came from Xishuangbanna, and she proposed about the wildlife damage compensation. So as you mentioned, how is this policy implementing there?
Well, it has been going on for a while, I think since 2010. And I was very excited. We did a study I was not in China at the time. In 2013, we published a study with a Chinese student doing some analysis of how to do this compensation. And the thing is that the compensation system is a complex financial tool that needs to be designed carefully. And right now is basically a flat compensation given by the government through an insurance company. What we proposed at the time was to try to create an real insurance model, in which the farmer pays a little premium that is subsidized by the government. And then this will help to engage the farmer in having skin in the game. So then they need to bear a bit of responsibility. So then they also feel responsible of thinking they are not a passive subjects. Yeah, they are agents, but they play a role in trying to reduce the conflict. So the way I see is that the current compensation scheme, I think, is very important. Without it, will be a disaster. But also we need to continue improving, because these complex systems, we don't get it right at the first time. So then as we learn how it's working, we can add new improvements that over time will become much better systems.
Okay, thank you. And I know Sanjiangyuan in Qinghai province also has such compensation policy. And Yuhan, you were involved in promoting and improving it. So tell us more about how is it carrying out there in Sanjiangyuan?
Okay. The work that Shan Shui has conducted is quite similar to the model that Ahimsa has described. So when I first started as a conservationist, I went to Sanjiangyuan National Park, and I was fascinated by so many large carnivores living there. But the problem is, local people has many yaks, and sometimes these large carnivores, whether it's snow leopards, common leopards, wolf, or whatever, will prey on the yaks. So we designed a community-based insurance program. Well, the local herder will pay a certain amount of money, and there is the support from the government. In the same time, we also fundraise from the public, because the whole society wants to have great snow leopards and common leopards living in the mountain. And then the local village organized their investigation group. And if a herder report there is a yak that has been eaten by a leopard or by a large carnivores, the investigator will go to the place and check if that is actually caused by wild animals. So this system is very efficient because all of the investigation process is based within the village. So it can respond really quickly, and all of the money will return to the herders to compensate their loss. And of course, I think it's in recent years, the government also has a very widespread insurance program that covers the loss of the herders. So we can see that the government is actually paying lots of money in order to reduce and compensate this type of loss that is caused by wildlife.
So it's become a partially commercial insurance to ensure that the herdsman will be compensated, right?
Yeah,
like because like Ahimsa said, I know Sanjiangyuan and Yunnan are among the first batch of the places where implement such policies. So it has improved over the years, and that's a really good thing to see. It's becoming more and more efficient for the herdsmen to get compensation. And so yeah, we've been talking about human wildlife coexistence in the wild, but you are currently focusing more on urban wildlife conservation. So tell us about it. What wildlife can we see within the cities, and how can we live with them?
That's a really good question, because when we talk about like human wildlife coexistence in the city, for many times I will get a question that, is there wildlife in the city?
Yeah, where are the wildlife? In the zoo?
So in the case of Shanghai, there are actually over thousands of wild raccoon dogs living in the neighborhoods, just right before your park, or right before an apartment. But people just don't know them because sometimes they only come out during the night. That's when people are sleeping. And the second question I have met is that sometimes people realize there are wild animals living in the cities, but people don't know how to get together with them. One day I was walking in one of the neighborhood in Shanghai, and there is this old guy who was very friendly, and he told me that people in my neighborhood really care about these wild raccoon dogs. And every morning, there are someone who will come and feed them with cat food because we want them to have food. But I was crying in my heart because wild animals, in most of the time, don't really need food from human beings. This type of human-fed cat food is not good for them. So this actually reflects the reality that citizens really care about wild animals living around them, but they may not know how to get together with them. And in some other cases, city buildings or city infrastructures are actually causing troubles for animals. So we are conducting a bird building coalition survey all around China. And in each year, we realize that many birds are dying from all of these glassy windows, because when they are flying, they could not recognize whether it is a window or it is a tree, and they just bump into the building and die. So we can see there are challenges, whether it is about like human awareness or it is about building infrastructure. There are challenges of how to coexist between this city and wildlife.
So do you get any policy support? I'm sorry, I think some construction is going on here. Can you hear me well still? Yeah, okay. So do you get any policy support from the society or from the government for your conservation projects?
Yeah. So actually, wildlife in the city is a relatively new concept and new phenomenon. We got lots of supports from the Shanghai government, from the forestry department, and all together with academia, such as Fudan University. We worked together to develop a series of citizen science projects. So for example, last year, we recruited over 100 volunteers to conduct mammal survey now, which is focusing on the raccoon dogs over like 2 weeks time. And in order to understand how many raccoon dogs are actually living in the city. And also we are working together to design a series of management protocols or management tools, so that when people realize that, oh, there's a raccoon dog living next door, what can I do? So we do all of this work all together with the government and with academia. And this project was actually funded by fundraising 2 years ago. It is supported by the whole society.
Have you seen any motions or proposals related to this area so far?
Actually, no, but I was really looking forward to see like these urban biodiversity or urban ecosystem related proposals.
Okay, let's see this year. There are still days left. Maybe we can see some improvements and proposals being raised this year. And Ahimsa, I remember you once said that there's nowhere safer for Asian elephants than in China. So can you tell us more about that? Why is that? Because you've been researching on elephant movements for years in different countries. So what is the difference in China?
Okay, so what's happening is that in most Asian elephant populations, elephants come into contact with people. And as elephants grow older, males continue growing and they become more problematic. So in most elephant populations, elephants eventually get killed by someone. So you see very few old males because someone will kill them before they reach old age. And then in most populations, you have some amount of poaching for the ivory. And that poaching comes into international trade, and some of it ends up consumed here in China. But what happened in China is that for the last, let's say, like almost 20 years, the law enforcement in this issue within China has been very strict. And the amount of elephants illegally killed is almost nothing. So there are some cases with some farmers, but it's very, very rare compared with other populations. So what we have right now, and this was a surprise, that's why I said in that interview, I found very surprising to me that there was such a low human cause mortality for elephants in China. And that explains the rapid population growth because elephants are well fed and they are breeding well and no one is killing them, so they have been expanding. And that's a very, very positive thing. I think what we have is a case of conservation success with this strict protection of elephants and the growth in numbers. And now we need to manage the problems that come from this success, which is the conflict. We have very, very intense conflict in China, much more intense than the previous place where I was working. I was working in Malaysia, and the human-elephant conflict is much more intense here than there. And it is because of that, because there are more elephants packed in a small area with many people, and these elephants feel very confident. They feel that they can go wherever they want, and they can do whatever they want.
All right, so other than elephants, regarding the ecological conservation and human-wildlife coexistence, do you see any difference between China and other countries? What does China do differently?
Yeah, I mean, first, China by scale itself is a completely different thing, right? It's a country with 1/5 of humankind, and which it has been growing economically so fast that is unprecedented in history. So then China is very different to other countries in that sense. The main difference that I see is that I can see a better long-term planning in China. Then it's embedded into the system. People are very used to think about long-term, and there are very good mechanisms to cascade down policies from the central government to the local governments. And that's good for conservation because conservation requires, in my opinion, a lot of top-down planning and policy. In that sense, China is well equipped to deal with these kind of complex problems. Another important thing about China is law enforcement. As I was saying, killing elephants is illegal everywhere. But in the other 12 countries with elephants, many people get away with that. People will kill an elephant and then there will be no investigation because it's better not to know. And this is their complex situations. In China, law enforcement is very serious. So that means that we can forget about poaching and think about other ways of doing things. So that's very, very positive. And I would say that also there is very good access to technology here. So I'm thinking, for example, I was in Sichuan a couple of years ago, seeing the giant panda national park, the launch of the park, and I was very impressed with the mechanism they have to detect forest fires. So they have very sophisticated system of sensors with different kind of cameras and with AI that can detect, you can identify the risk of fire based on the heat and the dryness of the place. And it can detect very fast any smoke that is a sign of fire, and can distinguish smoke from many other things that look similar. So it's very good, very sophisticated algorithm. And this is integrated in a way that there's a very fast reaction. I was thinking I would love to have that system for my country where forest fires are also a problem. So I think these are the things that I found most remarkable. Of course, on the negative side, when a country develops so fast with so many people, a lot of things are being lost. You know, a lot of forest is being lost. And for example, in Xishuangbanna, in the last 20 years, a good amount of forest has been lost. It has been fragmented into smaller habitats. So I think it's very important to understand that goodwill is not enough. The implementation is and will always be complex. We're dealing with very complex systems, and it's not enough to have good policies. We need to be able to test them on the ground and see how they work and keep improving them, because we will never end up having this kind of conflict between humans and nature.
All right, thank you. And Yuhan, how about you? I know you studied abroad on biodiversity conservation and management in Oxford. So from what you witnessed, what does China do differently?
My personal experience was quite similar to what Ahimsa mentioned just now. So back in Oxford, I have many friends and many classmates from all around the world focusing on biodiversity conservation. So in the beginning, my classmates, they might have some misunderstandings about conservation in China. But after a certain time, after we communicated and after I shared my working experience back in the Sanjiangyuan National Park, many of my friends were become very jealous of that I'm actually working in China, because in many countries, economic development is still the only and the number one priority. And there are not many policy support in terms of enforcement or funding for nature conservation. So I think that is one big difference that I noticed that China is doing differently from other countries.
All right. We are getting some comments online from social media. So let's take a look. There's a viewer from Facebook asking, I'm quoting it here, economic development and construction is bound to invade the living space of wildlife, such as the development of mining, water conservancy, and human activities. So starting from the point of conflict between animal habitat protection and human development, can you talk about where the balance is? And also, have all countries taken such measures? Yuhan?
Oh, I can go, sure. I think in some situations there the balance doesn't exist. So if we have this type of scientific data which show that this area is unique, is irreplaceable, then I think for this type of national treasure, we should prioritize nature conservation and avoid this type of construction, because this type of national treasures cannot be replicated elsewhere. But in other situations, I think this type of balance can be reached through certain ways. For example, when we're planning a certain projects, we can see how to avoid or reduce or minimize the impact of mining or a road on biodiversity, which is also need to be based on evidence and based on scientific research and evaluation. And on the other hand, while having this project, what is also possible is trying to restore ecosystem as much as possible, so that maybe we have to have this road here, but we have reduced the impact and we also restored the ecosystem around it. So overall, we may not have a negative impact, but rather have a positive outcome.
Yeah, please.
I would like to emphasize the importance of long-term vision, right? So then, for example, now it was approved the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. That as I hope many people know that by 2030, many countries have committed to have 30% of the land and waters protected as conservation areas, or having some kind of effective conservation measures. So that's a very good thing. We're increasing the amount of area that we consider to be allocated for conservation as the main priority. That's a huge change compared with 100 years ago, which this was very, very minimum. But also I want to do a bit of exercise at looking at the future, and using Europe as an example. 150 years ago, Europe was populated by many less people, but everywhere. Okay, people were widely spread, was rural population, so everywhere was cultivated, and there were people hunting and people putting pressure on the local ecosystems. In the 20th century, many people moved into cities, and then people now live in the big cities, in the local capitals, and in between there is much more space. This has been an incredible transformation in Europe with the growth of secondary forest, with the recovery of wildlife, the recovery of rivers. So then, if anyone who came from 70 years ago, the 1950s to now, will be surprised how healthy are European ecosystems compared to what they used to be, and how extensive. China has gone from less than 20% of people living in cities in the 1980s, when I was a child, I was born by then, to more than 60% living in cities. And I think this tendency is going to increase, is going to continue increasing for a while. So that means that, and also if we think by the end of this century, China might have about half of the population of what we have right now. So that means that in the next 80 years, we're going to have less people living in much smaller areas. And we will have a lot of space that if we plan properly and we set priorities, we can allocate these things for conservation. And many of the activities we do that can be done in a more efficient way when we're gaining a lot of efficiencies. So I think there is potential to do. There are different future scenarios, and we need to steer things to the right ones, to the ones we want, in which people can have wonderful lives in Shanghai, in Beijing, or in Kunming. But at the same time, we have a lot of space that is big, not tiny areas, big areas where ecosystem processes happen at bigger scale. And I think much of it is possible. I'm quite optimistic about, among the multiple possible scenarios, I'm very hopeful that we will go in a good direction.
Thank you so much. Well, the construction is going on. I have no idea where that sand comes from. I'm just hoping that they won't affect, the wildlife living in the city here. But yeah, thank you so much for your answering, and I hope that answered part of your question. I have another question here. Another Facebook viewer asking, they want us to talk about the town-city planning around ecological conservation.
I actually want to follow up the 30-30 target, which is 30% of land and 30% of the water should be conserved. So in this 30-30 target, China has actually made its commitment. And of course, among the 30% of the conservation area, that protected area and large area, such as national park, are very important. At the meantime, I think in the city area, for example, city parks are also important natural area. So currently, there are many city parks being planned in Beijing and in Shanghai, but we do notice a problem that many parks are very green, but they are not full of vigor. Sometimes their park may look beautiful to human beings, but wild animals or wild plants may not like them. So during this city planning process, we are actually recommending to have more local species, local plants, and leave some mini or leave some habitats for wild animals, so that city park can actually become the great example of how human and wildlife can coexist in the city.
I know there are some insect hotels. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's one way of improving the urban biodiversity. Because in the city parks, sometimes insects have nowhere to go. All of the leaves have been collected away because sometimes citizens want to have a really tidy street. But this type of actions is not really good for the wild animals, because as a result, insects have no place to hide, and also small mammals don't have place to find their food or hide from human beings. So apart from planting local species, another very important measure is to improve the management of the parks so that it can meet the need of human beings of, I want to walk in a beautiful park, as well as support the living of wild animals. It could be as small as an insect or a bit larger as a ferret or whatever.
Yeah, and not only the parks, and not only the parks, I saw that insect hotels in my community as well, just in recent years. I think it started last year. There's a tiny, board saying, please don't clean up. This is where I live. It's very, very cute to, just to raise public awareness of we should leave some space for the wildlife around us as well. And Ahimsa?
Yeah, I don't have any experience with city planning in China because all my life in China has been in a very rural area. But I have lived in some very big cities like Tokyo, Singapore, or Kuala Lumpur, which are incredibly rich in wildlife. And for me, when I was a city dweller, I enjoyed so much nature and having a place where people can go hiking and where people can experience nature. So I used to take my students and my friends hiking in the surrounding of these cities. And for me, it's one of my best personal experience has been being in the city, in contact with nature, and sharing this with people who were not expecting that, and seeing people fascinated, like, for example, Kuala Lumpur has many gibbons, which is a fascinating animal. And then when you told them, this is a gibbon and how is the biology and the behavior, and see how people suddenly get fascinated, and that people connect with nature, and that people do know that in cities we tend to have a high support for conservation, but much of that goes through connection. And I think it's important to create opportunities for people who live in cities to connect with nature and to understand that this is not something you watch on TV. It's something that you can experience and you can understand directly. And I'm a huge fan of city ecology and city wilderness. It has huge potential.
All right, thank you both for your answers. And now let's get back to, this year's 2 sessions. Do you have any expectations for the upcoming sessions? Is there any topic that you would like to see being stressed?
Yeah, I think we mentioned this like 30 minutes ago. Currently, I have no idea of whether there will be a motion about urban animals, urban wildlife. But I think this is a new phenomenon that is occurring in many Chinese cities. It may start from Shanghai and it can go to Nanjing, Hangzhou, or Beijing. And it will become very important in the future because in a country with such a huge population and with so many people living in the city, and how to get together with animals, I think it's very important. So I'm really looking forward, maybe this year or next year, that some delegates will propose that we need a specific management policy for human-wildlife coexistence in the city. And that's my sincere hope.
Me too, looking forward to such motions. And Ahimsa, what's yours?
Yes, so my peak of topic that I would like to see, again, if not this year, next year, would be promoting landscape connectivity for big animals. So then now we have a very, very ambitious and very, very exciting plan of national parks. In Xishuangbanna, there is a national park that is being finalized right now. It has been approved and is being finalized, and that's a great progress. And now the next step is how to do conservation outside the national park. So national park will not be the core, but we need to protect beyond that. Conservation is not just happening in those small islands. It has to be much broader scale. And I would like to see landscape connectivity, not only within China, but also with neighboring countries. Elephants don't know much about the administrative boundaries. And we have elephants that move between China and Laos. And we used to have elephants moving between China and Myanmar who don't move these days. So then I hope we can create habitat connections so then we can recover this kind of movement between China and Myanmar and between China and Laos.
All right, thank you so much. Those are really, really good proposals and motions. If I were the deputies, I will make sure to propose that. But yeah, my last question would be, where do you see China's ecological development in 5 years or even longer?
I'm actually quite optimistic because from my personal working experience, I can see there is the strong support for wildlife conservation. So yeah, so I'm quite optimistic. But in the meantime, I'm also looking forward to see that the policy are more evidence-based, and at the same time, there are more opportunities, as Ahimsa mentioned, for normal citizens to participate in wildlife conservation. Because through this participation, through this action, people are getting a better awareness of the wildlife around, whether it is in the city or in the wild, and they can contribute more to conserve nature.
Yeah, I would like to see that, let's say 7 years, okay? By 2030, I would like that we can tell that the 2030 targets were achieved. That would be a change of dynamics because, since 1992, we have been establishing this kind of UN-based goals that we systematically have failed to achieve. So I think it would be very good to see that at least China and hopefully, most of the world is being able to achieve these short-term targets. But because I'm very old, I'm much older than both of you, I also like to think way beyond 2030. So by 2050, I would like to see that by 2050, we are really kind of changing for real the dynamics of biodiversity loss. So the main problem is that in the 20th century, we transformed the planet, with human population growth and with our technological development. And we cannot complain because we are beneficiaries of that. But now we are in a different time and we need to think much more about how things will be in longer term and think about ecological restoration, both of habitats and populations. And that starts by stopping or halting the decline of biodiversity. So I'm looking forward to see a 2050 where we are thinking much more about how to achieve, positive outcomes rather than stop negative outcomes, which is where we are right now.
All right, thank you. Thank you both for joining, and thank you both so much for sharing. I personally learned a lot in the past 15 minutes. I appreciate your time and sharing, and thank you our audience for watching. So stay tuned. We'll have more brought to you from the 2 sessions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.